Good evening, dear scholars and friends, and I welcome all of you in this online platform that is our Bohujan Literature YouTube channel. Now, today, Mr. Jyoti Biswas will present his talk on the Chandal Movement of 1873, a historical outline. Mr. Jyoti Biswas completed his undergraduate and postgraduate studies in English literature at the University of Calcutta in 2013 and 2015, respectively. He completed MPhil at Department of English Studies, Central University of Tamil Nadu in 2021. Now he is pursuing PhD Department of English Studies, Central University of Jharkhand, and his research area is rituals of Namashudra community. His research interests include ritual studies, cultural studies, mythology, folklore, comparative religion, philosophy, and anthropology. I welcome Mr. Jyoti Biswas to this Bohujan Literature YouTube channel. And his today's presentation is about such a thing, such a movement, which is very much unfamiliar to all of us. As we learn from our history that social reforms movements and struggles for social justice are not complementary. Rather, they are contradictory and conflicting. Colonial Bengal simultaneously witnessed a social reforms movement and a social justice movement in the 19th and 20th centuries, while the social reforms movements targeted the upper caste's age-old orthodox rituals and ugly practices such as sati, polygamy, exorbitant dowry, child marriage, sowing children in Ganga Sagar, Antarjali Yatra, and so on. This social justice movement aimed at ending illiteracy and creating awareness about the human dignity in the lower social strata. Now, I welcome Mr. Jyoti Biswas to present his talk about the Chandal movement of 1873, a historical outline. Now it's Mr. Jyoti Biswas. Thank you.
Thank you, Palash. I hope I am properly audible.
Yes, you are properly audible.
Okay, for the sake of internet inconvenience, I would like to switch off the camera. Okay, so.
And on behalf of Mr. Jyoti Biswas, I will share the screen.
Yes, thank you, Palash, for your cooperation.
You're welcome.
So, dear scholars and friends, the tonight's talk that I will deliver is titled "The Chandal Movement of 1873: A Historical Outline." First, I will give an outline of the entire presentation before I go into the detailed discussions. Since this talk is about Chandal movement, a particular movement, the socio-political movement rather. First, I will talk about the different kinds of social and political movements in modern European or Indian history. And then the 18th century British India and anti-caste movements and major trends in anti-caste movements. And then the social and political dimension of 1873 Chandal movement. And thereafter, the observations and some critical commentaries by some of the important scholars. First, I want to mention that the 1873 Chandal movement has historically been marginalized. In major history textbooks, we don't find any kind of reference of this particular movement. But the detailed documentation of this movement had been done by British administrators in provinces like Faridpur, Bakirganj, Dhaka. And in all of their documentation, we find the vivid description of the movement. Well, whenever we talk about social and political movements, okay, Palash, if you can hear me, I think it is echoing. I mean, the voice is echoing. So,
Okay, fine, fine. Actually, this happens when I try to share the screen. That's why I have stopped the screen to share. Okay, chalo.
okay. Still, I can hear my own voice. So if you kindly mute your mic.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Now it is okay. Uh, whenever we talk about social and political movements, especially across the world, then we see right from the American Revolution and French Revolution to that of the civil rights movement, Dalit Panthers, and in recent times after the suicide of Rohit Bhabula, the student movements in different Indian universities by Ambedkarite student organizations. There are two or three important characteristics that we can highlight. Number one is the growing tendency of authoritarianism and anarchism, and at the same time, the trend and in many respects the idea of social marginalization that we can say. So whenever that sort of thing happens, the people who suffer from all sorts of obstacles try to raise their voice, and in this way different protests movements emerged. In one way or the other, the social and political movements always conform to or adhere to any particular ideology. Now, ideological framework has their origin in philosophical writings, in the writings of important thinkers. And if we study the development of social and political movements, even if we study the Protestant movement led by Martin Luther King and many others, then we find the appropriation of the concept of social justice, and at the same time, the reinvigoration or even uh, justification of the concept of strike, the concept of the practice of strike, and the concept and practice of protest. And of course, we cannot deny the fact that in most of the protest movement or social upheaval, uh, a lot of public damage of public property also took place, and this is something go on simultaneously. But the rage of the people who suffer from marginalization, the rage of the people who suffer from injustice, uh, usually take a radical turn. In all of these, dimensions, the very idea of political ideology or social ideology is very imminent. In this particular respect, we find that there are different kinds of social and political movements, and sociologists put different names of all those movements. Now, I want to give a brief outline of different socio-political movements that emerged right from the American uh, movement, the movement of freedom struggle. The first kind of social movement, which is known as a liberalism. Liberalism is a powerful political doctrine that upholds individual liberty, personal space, self improvement, and free choice and living. Especially the American War of Independence from 1776 till 1783 was an example of this liberalism. And there are few thinkers, philosophers who inspire this liberalism, the liberal political movement. And they are Thomas Hobbes, whose Leviathan, published in 1651, is very, very significant text. And then, of course, Thomas Paine and John Locke. John Locke is a British philosopher who is one of the pioneers of Enlightenment theory, and he's writing, the two treatises on government. This is a very, very powerful statement that inspired many activists. So liberalism in many ways talk about the individual liberty. Then another sort of social and political movement we find in the name of socialism. Socialism, in opposition to liberalism, always talk about the collective consciousness, the collective importance rather than individual importance. Under the socialism, we have many subdivisions. Someone say that it's a communism, so Marxism, and the Bolshevik revolution there. Even Ambedkar also believed in one kind of socialism, which is quite different from Marxism. So whether Ambedkarism, Marxism, Leninism, all of them come under the idea of socialism. In socialism, the most dominant important thing is the abolition of the private property and a very equal distribution of resources. And in this way, making the society a better place to live in, where the hierarchy of rich and the poor will cease to exist. This is more or less, and some of the thinkers who are quite influential in developing the socialist political movement and ideology are, of course, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. In the 19th and early 20th century, we find the movement like nationalism. Nationalism, in many ways, is indicative of the fact that the people of any particular geographical location do feel that sort of an emotional and at the same time ethnic tie with the land they occupy. And right from Otto von Bismarck in Germany, or even before that, Napoleon Bonaparte in France, to that of Indian nationalist movement, the concept of nationalism, nation-oriented thoughts, land-oriented thoughts, where the concept of ethnicity is very rooted, all these ideas played a very important role. In other words, nationalism made people realize that this is your land and you are no longer under the subjugation of a foreigner. And it is a right, and it is your authority, and it is a social and political commitment or obligation to raise your voice against the oppressors or even foreigners. So the idea of nationalism can be understood in the background of European imperialism. In recent times, we find another set of social and political movements, which is known as social and ethical movements that focus on the concept of social justice, equality. Very often we read the history of feminism, where women are seeking the equal rights, not only in workplace, but also in other spaces, such as university colleges. But in America, we find some sort of a social and ethical movements in the name of civil rights, where African Americans were seeking equal right to entertain in American society. In other words, the African Americans were trying to regain their own dignified position in American society. Following the same logic, here in 18th century and in 19th century, we find in India anti-caste movements. And if we trace the development of anti-caste movement, then they're following the African American movements, and anti-caste movements in India also sought to claim a dignified position for the untouchables and the marginalized. So all these social movements under different ideological parameter and designation played a very important role in changing the modern world, modern history. and in this way influencing the respective government to initiate many developmental projects. Now, with this particular note, I would like to focus on the anti-caste movements that developed in British period. We, the student of history and literature, know very well how anti-caste movements emerged in British period. And of course, there is a background that we all know, that how British uh, rulers, right from Warren Hastings uh, till they Montague James Ford rule, and then till 1935, when the Government of India Act for the first time got implemented, which is, you can say, our first constitution. A whole range of uh, judicial, administrative, and policies were being implemented, and through these policies, the the very democratic nature of the British rule got reflected. And there are, of course, many debates uh, regarding the colonial enterprise among post-colonial scholars. But we, the Bahujan scholars, have to be very critical to the very post-colonial interpretation of colonial India. What we have found is that the beginning of modern education in India, the introduction of English as a medium of construction, and then the role of the missionaries in setting up schools and hospitals and other uh, uh, urban facilities to the untouchables, and at the same time the development of agriculture, and more importantly the development of industry, railways, and uh, you know postal services. All of these played a very important role in making a broader change, we can say. And all this change is uh, accompanied with the realization of the concept of identity, concept of caste. So along with the developmental policies, the British rule, such as introduction of English education, modern education system, we have witnessed, a group of scholars or even activists and thinkers across India raise their voice against the Brahminical caste system, which until the arrival of British rule was in a disguise. So the British people came, and the local rulers, or even the vernacular rulers or vernacular leaders realized the practice of caste and how the caste is being codified. So here it is only in British period that the leaders like uh, Harichand Thakur or even Guru Chand Thakur, leaders like Ayodhya or even leaders like Periyar, or even leaders like Ambedkar or Phule, and they are and others raise their voice. And in this way, we find the anti-caste movements are trying to terminate the caste system, which is very much racial and hierarchical and discriminatory. And at the same time, they are seeking the equal representation in government jobs as well. So all of these, played a very important role. But to understand the very existence of caste system in 18th century, I would like to quote one important section from uh, the book, The People of India by Herbert Hope Risley. This book was first published in 1908, and I want to quote from Risley's text in order to show all of you that despite having the development of modern education system, introduction of English, the rural India, especially the people living in rural areas far away from the metropolitan cities like Bombay, Calcutta, or Madras, were still under the shackle of the Brahminical caste system, and how these people suffered. Because this particular quotation from Herbert Hope Risley will help us contextualize the similar sort of condition of the Chandals living in eastern Bengal. To connect the condition of the Chandal in second half of 19th century, I am reading this particular section, a particular commentary by Herbert Hope Risley. I want to quote Herbert Hope Risley. But be the season good or bad, the pious Hindu's life is overshadowed by the exaction of the Brahman. Before the Brahman starves, the king's larder will be empty. Cakes must be given to him, while children of the house may lick the grinding stone for a meal. His stomach is bottomless pit. He will beg with a lac of rupees in his pocket and a silver begging bowl in his hand. In his greed for funeral fees, he spies out corpses like a vulture and rejoices in the misfortune of his clients. A village with a Brahman in it is like a tank full of crabs. To have him as a neighbor is worse than leprosy. Like the devil in English proverbial philosophy, the Brahmin can cite scripture for his purpose. He wishes his sacred thread, but does not cleanse his inner man. Page number 130 and 31. So this long quotation will help us understand the practice of Brahminical priesthood and the social superiority of Brahmin status, and how that two superiority put the life of many people in peril. Now, this is an example of how the rural areas in second half of 19th century looked like. With this particular observation keep in mind, I want to focus on the Chandals or the Namashudras, now they're called Namashudras, and how they raised their voice and under what circumstances they were compelled to raise their voice, and how they mobilized their movement, and what are the impacts that the movement actually put, and at the same time whether this movement was successful or not, and how we in 21st century would like to interpret this particular movement that happened almost 150 years ago. Well, so before I come to the exact timeline of Chandal movement, that is 1872-73, we have to do some sort of a historical overview of the caste system in Bengal that we all know very well. Even there are many Bengal historians who also have the same some sort of an agreement that right from the reign of Ballal Sena, Ballal Sen reigned from 1159 to 1179, and right from the reign of Ballal Sena, the caste system, so to say, for the first time emerged in Bengal, and that his text, the Ballal Charitam, and other two Upapuranas. One is the Brihad Dharma Purana, the other is the Brahma Vaivarta Purana. This text, three texts. One is Ballal Charitam or Ballal Charit. Second one is the Brihad Dharma Purana, and third one is Brahma Vaivarta Purana. Help us see the origin or development of mixed castes in and around 11th and 12th century, and how the social categorization are being created. These three texts help us see the stratification, and at that particular time this stratification was taking its root, and this stratification was emerging, and through this emergence of the stratification, the marginalization of a group of people were also taking place. And with the arrival of the Islam, we know very well that thousands and thousands of marginalized people got converted, and we are not supposed to assume the fact that all of them embraced Islam by their willingness. Of course, there are political force or military force, and then economic crisis as well. But whether it is by force or economic crisis or by willingness, conversion to Islam by untouchables is a very remarkable thing in history of Bengal. With the arrival of the British rule, when the British people understood the stratification in the name of caste, they implemented some policies that in many ways expose the reality. And it is by conducting the census report in 1872 that it is needless to say that the Indian people or even the Western world for the first time came to know that how stratified the society is. And this stratification, that hierarchy, that rigid caste system was at that particular time hidden from the public view. But British people, through the census and other administrative reports, for the first time exposed it. With this particular background, we have found that in some provinces, now all of them are Bangladesh, like Jashore, Khulna, Barishal, Faridpur, there's one particular caste and they are known as Chandals. Now, I don't want to give a detailed account of who the Chandals are. For the sake of information, we can say that the Chandals of 1873 were known as Namashudras in 2022. So in the places like Jashore, Khulna, Barishal, Faridpur, almost 70 to 75% Chandals lived. And there, in the intersection of 1870 to 73, a remarkable thing happened. That is known as 1873 Chandal Movement. Interesting fact is that this particular movement was not even mentioned by any so-called Kolkata-based Chatterjee Banerjee historians of that particular time. But we are very grateful to the administrative officers of that particular time who are posted in Faridpur and Dhaka, that they have kept the record of this remarkable incident. And it is by reading their reports that we can develop an historical outline of the 1873 Chandal movement. First, I want to acknowledge that Dr. Upendranath Biswas, the former minister, Department of Backward Class Welfare, Government of West Bengal, is credited with publishing one book in 2015 when he was the minister. The name of the book is The 1873 Movement for Dignity and Equality Before Law. And this book was published from the official publication of Department of Backward Classes Welfare, Government of West Bengal. And Dr. Upendranath Biswas is the first scholar who, after going through the authentic study of the archives, brought out this book. And in this book, we not only find the factual details of the 1873 movement, but also come across his own observations. So it is by reading this book that we can historicize this particular movement. And in this respect, we have to acknowledge the contribution that Dr. Upendranath Biswas made by bringing out this book to the public. Another book was published in 2021, edited by Kopil Krishna Thakur. The name of the book is Bangla Namashudra, the Namashudras of Bengal. And there, another important intellectual of Bahujan Society of Bengal, that is Dr. Atul Krishna Biswas, contributed a long chapter. And the name of the chapter is Namashudra Itihas Sandhane. And in this particular chapter, he also talked about the Chandal বিদ্রোহ, এক অসাধারণ অধ্যায় ইতিহাসে উপেক্ষিত শান্তিপূর্ণ নিষ্ক্রিয় প্রতিরোধ আন্দোলন 1872-73 সালে চন্ডাল বিদ্রোহ. So Atul Krishna Biswas and Upendranath Biswas did a remarkable job in bringing out this neglected historical episode to the public. And today, when I'm presenting, I'm really indebted to their research. But at the same time, my own observations will be put in order to analyze this particular movement. So first, I would like to give you the names of those leaders who participated in 1873 movement. In his book, Dr. Upendranath Biswas mentioned 7 leaders. Okay, so let me mention their name first. Number 1, Dwarakanath Mandal, village Mushlandapur, police station Mukshidpur, district Faridpur. Number 2, Charon Sapa, village Amgram, police station Madaripur, district Bakirganj. Number 3, Roy Chand Mandal, village Daudkora, Police Station, Kashiani, District Faridpur. Number 4, Nilmoni Biswas, Village Daudkora, Police Station, Kashiani, District Faridpur. Number 5, Shibu Dhali, Village Pursur, Police Station, Kashiani, District Faridpur. Number 6, Ramchand Baksha, Village Pursur, Police Station, Kashiani, District Faridpur. And number 7, Bhajan Bala, Village Pursur, Police Station, Kashiani, District Faridpur. So they are the 7 leaders who led this movement. Okay. So before I go into the detailed report that 2 officers prepared on this particular movement, I want to mention the names of the officers whose records were invaluable and based on whose reports Dr. Rupendranath Biswas prepared this book. I want to name the officers and their posts whose reports were used in order to prepare this book, and rather whose reports were invaluable to come to know about the 1873 movement. In other words, without the reports prepared those administrative officers, it would have been impossible for us to know about this particular movement. W.L. Owen, he was District Superintendent of Police, Faridpur. A. Abercrombie is Officiating Commissioner of Dhaka Division. A. Mackenzie, Junior Secretary to the Government of Bengal. A. J. Fraser, Deputy Magistrate, Faridpur. W. S. Wells, Magistrate of Faridpur. W. L. Healy, Inspector General of Jails, Lower Provinces, Dhaka. L. C. Abbott, Officiating Under Secretary to the Government of Bengal. George Campbell, the then Lieutenant Governor of Bengal. So they are the officers who exchanged their reports, letters, and it is by collecting all the reports and letters that Rupendranath Biswas compiled this particular book. An interesting fact is that in this particular book, he also digitally uploaded the pages. So he digitized all these reports. So this book is very helpful, and our scholars should collect this book from Dr. Rupendranath Biswas. Well, now there are 2 reports that I want to read. The 2 reports. One report was dated 18th March 1873. Another report dated 8th April 1873. Okay. If we just carefully read some important sections from the report, then we find the very factual details and historicity of this particular movement. This report was written by W.L. Owen, who was District Superintendent of Police, and this report was written to W.S. Wells, who was the Magistrate of Faridpur. And the date of the report is 18th March 1873. I want to read some important sections from the report for the better understanding. Last year, one Charon Sapa, a rich Chandal of Amgram village in Bakirganj, gave a feast to which all castes were invited. Among them, Brahmins, Kayasthas of several orders, and Shudras. All these, at the instigation of the Kayasthas, refused to accept the invitation, coaching their refusal with taunts and reproaches reflecting on the Chandals, the words used being to this effect: eat with them who permit their women to go to market and who were employed as mathors in jails for removing filthy and everything unclean. What next? In simple words, the particular movement took place in a village called Amgram, in the house of Mr. Chorun Sapa. So Mr. Chorun Sapa, at the death of his father, invited the adjacent villagers to participate in the funeral feast. And at that invitation, the local Kayasthas and Brahmins refused it by saying that they are Chandas, they are lower caste, they do all sorts of menial work, they clean the bathrooms in the jail. So we, the upper caste, how can we go there and to sit and eat in the house of a Chandal? So it was, we can say, the direct reason of this particular movement, which according to Dr. Atul Krishna Biswas is a general strike, and the first general strike in the history of India. Okay, so after this particular incident, that the Brahmins and Kayasthas refused to participate in the funeral ceremony of Mr. Chorun Sapa in Gamgram village, the local Chandal heads or leaders called a meeting. Let me quote from this report. A meeting accordingly of all heads of village was called. The matter was hotly discussed, leading evidently to the adoption of the following resolutions among the entire body of Chandals in that part of the country. So in this meeting, 3 or 4 resolutions were taken. Number 1, women must not in future visit huts and bazaars, because at that particular time the Brahmins and Kayasthas saw that women from the so-called marginalized castes used to visit the markets, sell the products, make money, and go to the houses, and in this way run their family. That means the women from the upper castes were not allowed to go to the market and make money by doing business. So, of course, to Brahmins and Kayasthas, it was a very, I would like to say, derogatory scene that women of these communities are coming to the market. But interesting fact is that today, those scholars who are interested in gender studies can highlight this issue, that back in 1872-73, it was a custom among the so-called marginalized castes that women should go to the market, sell the products, and in this way make money and run the family. It was such an incident that we can find that women were truly empowered in the so-called marginalized castes compared to the women in Brahmin and Kayastha families. Second resolution was service of no kind, whatever be taken with other castes. That means the Chandals of that particular province, of these villages, took the resolution that from that day forward, they would not serve any house of Brahmins or any other castes. In other words, in our modern day, we find thousands of maid servants used to visit Kolkata by traveling by Bonga local or Lokkikantapur local. So from rural areas, women are coming to the city in order to work as a housemaid in different houses, in different apartments. Now imagine what if the housemaid organizations declared that from tomorrow forward they would not go to the Kolkata and do not serve any Babu's house. Then what would the situation be? 150 years ago, the Chandals of those villages took the resolution that from that day forward, they would not serve the house of upper castes. It was a strike. It was a strike. And number 3, food prepared by all other castes of Hindus not to be partaken of. In other words, they would not even take the food prepared by other castes. So these are the 3 resolutions that they undertook, and these resolutions, according to the district magistrate, has a far-reaching consequences for the next couple of months. And then W.L. Owens, at the end of this report, furnished the development of this movement. I want to quote, having now detailed the measures taken by me to allay the ferment at present prevailing among the Chandals in their tracts, I shall endeavor to answer succinctly the several points at the head of the report. Number one, the strike among the Chandals has extended to all that tract of swamp country situated in the police stations of Mukshidpur and Gopalganj. Number two, it has no political significance at present, but is an effort made by them to raise themselves in the social scale among the Hindus. So I request all of you to kindly listen to the summing up that Mr. W.L. Owen prepared in his report. And the second point tells that it has no political significance at present, but is an effort made by them to raise themselves in the social scale among the Hindus. Number third, it started last year at Amgram in Bakirganj on account of Hindus of all castes refusing the invitation of a feast given by Charan Sapa, a rich and influential Chandal. Number four, by the heads of all Chandals, villagers in the swamp country of South Faridpur and northwest of Bakirganj, they took a resolution and decided not to serve any upper caste houses. Number five, equality in the treatment in jails between Chandal criminals and the criminals of other castes. So this particular movement had a background also, that it was found in reports of police superintendents that in the jails, the Chandal convicts were forced to clean the bathrooms, to do the job of matho. And that particular thing was very much in many sense derogatory, and many Chandals, even in the prison, raised their voice and protested against it, but it did not have any particular impact. And in this sense, the Chandals who served the job of a mathor in jails were looked down upon. The next, to hold no communication with men of other castes. As I told you that this is also another resolution. Next, contemptuous treatment of Chandals by other castes, especially by Kayasthas, and they are being forced by government to remove filth and others in jails, while criminals of other castes are exempted. So this is also an observation made by those people who were forced to clean filthy things in the jails, that only members of Chandal castes were forced to do this job, that the criminals of other castes were not given this particular duty. So that to them is a discrimination. Next, the contemptuous treatment of Chandals by other castes, being a social question, cannot be remedied by themselves, but their being forced to remove the filth and others of jails might be effected by a respectful representation to the government. In this particular resolution, it is also taken that since the government made forced us to conduct this particular thing, and they made us to clean the bathroom and other filthy things, let the government come in and settle this issue, whether they want it as a permanent job. So nowadays we see the group D service in railways when they do all these manual works, but it is under the remuneration of the government. But interesting fact is, when Chandals were forced to do that work, there was no such concept of remuneration, or they were just some sort of they were treated as slaves. So they were not paid. It was not a paid job. And last one, the strike will to some extent affect the rice sowing in the swamp country, considering that they have before this tilled lands belonging to other castes, dividing the produce between them, and they have now determined to relinquish them, and the people of other castes not being sufficient to supply their places. It shows that most of the lands of Kayasthas and Brahmins were plowed by Chandals. And since Chandals took the resolution not to work in the field of Brahmins, not to work in the house of Brahmins, their lands remained unplowed. And that created a shortage in food supply. So it affected the market and the economy and the daily business also. So this is more or less the report that Mr. W.L. Owen sent to the magistrate of Faridpur W.S. Wells on 18th March 1873. It is by reading this particular excerpts from the report of W.L. Owen we in 21st century can anticipate how great, how brave, how courageous those Chandals were. Now I want to read two important sections from another report dated 8th April 1873. This report is written by W.S. Wells, who was the magistrate of Faridpur, and this report was written to the Commissioner of Dhaka Division. The Commissioner of Dhaka Division was A. Abercrombie. I want to read some important sections, and then I will reflect on some, some important issues that some modern scholars like Atul Krishna Biswas and Upendranath Biswas actually made in their research. Well, on Saturday, I inspected the distillery, the Pathshala, and the Thana, and conversed also with 14 Chandals, headmen, who had been summoned. They do not willingly admit having formed any combination not to work for any other class, or will they allow that they forcibly prevent or use any influence in hindering others from accepting employment. I talked to them a long time and elicited that their object is to obtain a better position in place of being despised and degraded class they are in the eyes of their neighbors. Follow the language that W.S. Wells talked to the Namashudra leaders or Chandal leaders, and the Chandal leaders were saying that, sir, our primary purpose of conducting this strike is that we want dignity and respect from others. If someone insults us, then it is not as per with the it is not as per with our rights. We want equal justice, we want equal dignity, we want equal opportunity in society. This was our motto. So just imagine 150 years ago, the Chandals of those remote villages of Bakirganj and Faridpur met the, met the officers and raised their voice, sir, we want equal justice, we want dignity, we want equal opportunity. Today, when we are looking at the outside world and seeing that the outside world is becoming too difficult for us, whether it's a university or judiciary or even in any other places, then we have to reflect on the brave and courage and at the same time the resilience that our ancestors undertaken. This is very much interesting that they are claiming for the equal dignity and respect, and this is on record. This is on record, and we are thankful to the administrative officers who recorded all of this, that today when we read, we can visualize how did everything happen 150 years ago, that the local leaders demanded equal justice, and in this way raising the very democratic nature of their movement. Mr. W. Evans also witnessed something which is also an important part of this time. I want to quote from his report. I visited a Pathshala established about a month ago in a Chandal village on the other side of the Khal. The boys were beginning to learn the letters of the alphabet, following the written letter with dry pens and shouting out the name of each letter as they did so. মানে এক কথায় নামটা পড়া। On leaving Faridpur, I left instructions for the sub-inspector of education to follow me and hope to be able to institute many schools among these people who are eager to learn but hardly able anywhere to support a school. The sub-inspector has submitted his report, and I hope to be able to start a system of cheap education among them as far as the funds of the coming year may permit. they appear sufficiently eager to learn. So these are the two reports. Based on these two reports, we had a fair idea about the 1873 Chandal movement, its direct reason, its economic and social boycott, and its influences, and at the same time, the reports of the administrative officers citing the impact it puts on the market, on economy, on cultivation, and at the same time, the reports of W.S. Wells that also reflect on the concept of social resistance and the concept of social reorganization that Chandal leaders at that particular time were undertaking. Now, very often we hear about the Namashudra movement, and in the Namashudra movement, we find that the year 1880 is considered to be the formal beginning, and the name of Guruchan Thakur came in the forefront and how he led their education reform. But here in this particular report, W.S. Wells mentioned that how Pathshala was being constructed, and this report was written on 8th April 1873. So these are some of the reports that give us some authentic description of the time, and at the same time some factual details, and more importantly it helps us see how the people at that particular time were undertaking the reformist activities, and in this way trying to uplift their lot. Interesting fact is that when in the post COVID-19 period, we see that thousands and thousands of primary schools are getting closed, completely shut down, because there is there are no teachers, no students, nothing. Then we can reflect on this 1873 Chandal movement and how this movement not only raised their voice against the social oppression and humiliation, but also in one way or the other tried to reconstruct their rural society by constructing schools, pathshala. So these are important aspects that we can derive by going through this historical documentation of 1873 Chandal movement. Now, I want to focus on the observations made by two important scholars of our time who in many ways helps us, because it is by reading their writings that we came to know about the 1873 Chandal movement. Dr. Atul Krishna Biswas, in his book, in this chapter, which is included in the book Bangla Namashudra, wrote that 1872-73 movement was the first great general strike led by any community under a peaceful demonstration. And in the entire British period, we have read incidents of strikes, and nationalist leaders hold many strikes. But long before the development of Gandhian politics of non-violence, according to Atul Krishna Biswas, we have seen how Chandals in 1873 introduced the concept of non-violence, introduced the concept of peaceful protest and demonstration. And that is a remarkable achievement according to Dr. Atul Krishna Biswas. Dr. Upendranath Biswas is of the observation that the 1873 movement is the first historical incident in the life of Namashudras. And this historical incident reflects on the growing trend of social and political mobilization. And in this way, this particular movement is comparable to Bhima Koregaon. This particular movement is comparable to the movement of Jyotirao Phule and Savitribai Phule. This movement is comparable to the movement of Periyar and at the same time Swami Achyutananda. So these are some commentaries. And now I want to conclude my presentation by saying that today when Bahujan scholars from Bahujan society across India are trying to get united, and in this way trying to develop their intellectual resources, and more importantly, trying to find out the history, then reading the history of 1873 Chandal movement, according to me, is of a matter of great pride to all of us, that we can reflect how great uh, the leaders of the 1872-73 movement were, that they in many ways pioneered the concept of social resistance, the concept of civil rights movement, and at the same time the concept of peaceful demonstration or non-violence. In social and political history, especially in Dalit studies, we are told by teachers to read the civil rights movement in America, and we also read the civil rights movement of America. We read the history of Martin Luther King Jr., and we read the first constitutional amendment brought by Abraham Lincoln to abolish slavery. So anti-slavery movement or civil rights movement by African Americans are the glorious history. But at the end of this presentation, we can also say that yes, we the Bahujans of Bengal have our own history too. That like the civil rights movement, we have also our own movement that is also glorious. That in 1873, leaders like Dwarkanath Mandal, Charan Sapa, Roychand Mandal, Nilmani Biswas, Shibu Dhali, Bhajan Bala, we even don't know how they look like. But thanks to the British government that they recorded all these incidents, that we know their name. We can ask our artists to draw a sketch, imaginary sketch of Dwarkanath Mandal or Shibu Dhali or even Bhajan Bala. So like African American civil rights movement, we can also say that yes, in 1873, we had also our own movement. So in this way, we can say that the 1873 Chandal movement, which is titled by Upendranath Biswas as 1873 Movement for Dignity and Equality Before Law, is a matter of great pride to all of us, that we have to know about it. We have to keep records of this particular movement in our own notebooks, and in this way, while getting assimilated and while developing any particular talk, we can frequently cite this particular movement, and in this way say that look, we have also our history, and that history is a glorious one, that 150 years ago our ancestors led a democratic movement. So in this way, I want to conclude my presentation, and thank you.
Thank you, Jyoti. Thanks a lot for your beautiful presentation. To me, your presentation is very much informative, and we, all the scholars and the viewers, all are here. We have learned so many things about this Chandal movement of 1873. That is the historical perspective of this movement. And from Jyoti's presentation, it is very much evident that in our modern time or in this 21st century, there are very few informations that we can get except from that report. So in future, I wish we, all the scholars here in this platform, we will talk about much more. We will research about these things, about this movement, and we will try to flourish our conceptions and views and make a historical perspective, not only the historical perspective, but make it a social and cultural perspective in every respect. And I think we should conclude here. And I would like to thank Jyoti Biswas once again for his beautiful presentation. And we'd like to thank all the viewers, all the scholars, friends who are present here. And once again, we will try to present another talk on the next week. Until then, take care and hope all the scholars will prepare their presentation and we will try to present in this platform. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.